Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Actually, our new educational series for student photographers. And as I always say, no matter how long you've been in this business, we're all student photographers. My name is Joe Brady, and I'm the webinar marketing manager for the MAC Group. I'm just here today to get things started. However, also as a owner of a photography studio, I'm always interested to hear what the folks at PhotoShelter have to say. And I've had a sneak peek at today's program, and I know if you put this information into practice, it will definitely have a great impact on your success. Today's webinar is sponsored by Mac on Campus and PhotoShelter. Mac on Campus is the MAC Group's educational support program. It's our way of giving back to the photographic community, and what I'd like to do is introduce Bill Gratton from Mac on Campus to say hi to everybody. Good afternoon, Bill.
I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming in and participating on this Friday afternoon. I think this is going to be one of the more intriguing webinars of the series. Certainly should have a lot of information in here done from an interesting perspective. So I'm glad you're all tuning in. Hopefully you'll share it with your friends and fellow students as well. Also want to just add another touch about some places to get some additional information. We recently sponsored several workshops with ASMP's Strictly Business Conference, and there was a lot of really good material that was presented there, and we're working really hard actually to get most of that material to put on the MOC, the Mac on Campus website as well, but it's not there yet. But one couple things in particular, Susan Carr, who's a big part of ASMP, has a new book out called The Art and Business of Photography. It's really excellent and full of resources. And then also as an association, they have what's called the ASMP Professional Business Practices in Photography. It's a really good resource for anybody starting out a business in terms of helping get pricing guidelines and business practices and things of that sort. So I would encourage you to check out both of those things and stay tuned for the webinar.
All right, thanks, Bill. So just a little bit of mechanics before I introduce our special guest and speaker. You can communicate with us through the control panel. You can see a questions control panel there, so if anything starts to go awry, please let us know. Also, if you have any questions that are beyond the scope of today's presentation, we'll give you an email address at the end that you can send your questions to. And yes, the webinar is being recorded, so if you have to leave early or for those that join us late, we will send an email out sometime on Monday, so give us the weekend, to let everyone know where the recorded version of the webinar lives so that you can then review it and share it with everyone else. So our special guest, we're honored to have Alan Murabayashi with us today. Alan is the CEO and founder of PhotoShelter, which is an online service that provides website, archive, and sales functionality to over 68,000 photographers. Alan is a prolific author also. He's authored several free marketing guides for photographers, including the Photographer's SEO Cookbook, Blogging for Photographers, and Google Analytics for Photographers. He also serves on the board of directors for the Eddie Adams Workshops, which is the leading student and young professionals photojournalism workshop. Alan was also a founding employee of hotjobs.com. Two more tidbits, born and raised in Honolulu, Alan is a graduate of Yale University, and I'm also told that he flosses daily. So good for you, Alan. So provided his dental maintenance is complete and up to date, it's time to turn things over to Alan. So let's give him control of the screen and get the presentation started. Good afternoon, Alan.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Flossing is very important. So for you students out there, let me tell you what, I wish I had started flossing earlier than I did, and then I wouldn't have, some gum recession as old people get. But today we're not talking about dentistry. Today we're talking about starting your photo business, and we thought we would do kind of a slightly different spin than you might normally hear when you're going to presentations about starting your photo business. So there are a ton of good resources out there. There are a ton of great books out there. The one thing that we didn't really see was a conversation with recent graduates saying, gosh, I really wish I had learned this, or I wish I had done this, or I wish I had listened to my parents when they told me to do X, Y, and Z.
Hey, Alan, I should also let you know. Second.
Yep.
We don't see your screen yet. If you can click to show my screen, we just got black here.
Let's see.
There we go.
Is that working now?
Now it's working.
Okay. All right, let's try this again.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
So let that be a lesson to you Let that be a lesson to you Keynote users.
Exactly. Fit in window.
As much as I love Apple, sometimes it's time to stick to PowerPoint.
We'll re-record this so that you get the full screen experience and everything, but bear with us today. So these are the 6 College Photographer of the Year award winners that we're going to be talking about. And let's start here, because a lot of students coming out of school have a high degree of optimism. I know I did when I came out. And optimism generally can be a very, very good thing. So there's this article that I found last week in the New York Times that had some really interesting things. So first, underestimating obstacles lowers your stress and anxiety and leads to better health and well-being. Well, that's all very, very good. We live in a very, very stressful environment nowadays. So having just an optimistic outlook can help your health. But the second point starts to get a little bit iffy here. Our brain takes note of rags to riches stories. So we all know about Facebook and Groupon and all these guys out there, and concludes that we may become rich and powerful one day. But when we're told that 1 in 10 is unemployed and 1 in 3 suffers from cancer, we take no notice. So we like to hone in on the positive stuff and we like to block out the negative stuff. Well, underestimating the risk also makes us less likely to practice safe sex, save for retirement, buy insurance, or undergo medical screenings. So again, when you come out of school, you have this feeling of I'm young, I'm invincible, and then as you age, all of these things start biting you in the butt. So I want to encourage you to find the right balance between optimism and good planning for the future, and that's some of what we're going to cover today in this webinar. The next person that we talk to is the Tax Ninja, Matt Whatley at taxninja.com, and he talked to us a little bit about creating your business, some of the legal considerations. So he is a certified public accountant and a lawyer. And he said, well, do you really need to incorporate when you come out of school? And the considerations that he had in mind were, number one, is there a tax benefit that's going to be conferred to you by creating a business entity? And then number two, what does this have to do with your liability as a person and as a business? Well, if you don't have a whole lot of income, you're not going to receive a whole lot of tax benefit. So if you're making $20,000 a year as a photographer coming out of school, it's unlikely that you're paying any taxes in the first place, or you're paying very, very little tax. So having a tax write-off isn't going to confer you any benefit. You might want to consider, however, what's called a single member LLC, or limited liability corporation, which allows common deductions like your home office, health insurance, etc. So the LLC isn't a tax benefit mechanism per se, and depending on what state you're living in, you're going to have to spend several $100s to create that LLC with the state. But it does provide a limitation of liability. And that's important because if someone sues you, you don't want them taking your car or your home. You just want them to put your business out of business. So does your jurisdiction have an LLC that's inexpensive to operate? In some places, I think in San Francisco, it costs $800 a year to create an LLC, but in other places, it might cost $100. So you might want to check that out before you create your business entity. So here are the two things in structuring your business that I talked about. The first being the tax benefit aspect of it, and the second being the liability and exposure aspect of it. Now, I'm gonna say that the standard disclaimer that you always hear: this isn't tax advice, this isn't legal advice. Consult your lawyer or your accountant. And you know, you really have to do that because I'm showing you two equal circles with a little intersection in between, and saying, you know, that's the sweet spot that you have to maximize. But in fact, that's going to vary depending on who you are, how much income you're generating, etc. And I'll tell you, a lot of people coming out of school are in very, very different places economically, right? Some people are getting assistance from their parents. Some people have a trust fund. Other people have nothing but a mound of debt. And that's really going to affect the way you think about your financial future. Here's another one. I'm a gear hound, man, and you know, knowing the Mac group and sometimes having access to discounts that they're providing, it's very, very enticing to get as much lighting equipment, that's my weakness, as possible. But the question is, do you really need all that gear? So the Tax Ninja says photographers typically incur $10,000 to $15,000 in equipment every 2 years. Now, when you buy capital expenses, like a computer or a printing machine, you know, for a business, or a car wash or whatever, the government allows you to amortize or divide that capital expense into different pieces which you can recognize each year. So in the case of a computer, the IRS typically says that has a 3-year amortization schedule. So if you paid $1,000 for your computer, you can write off $333 per year. But with photographic equipment, you can actually have it all tax deductible in the first year, which can have a major impact on your taxable income. So the first question to ask is, do you have any income to offset with the purchase? If you're right out of school and you buy $10,000 worth of equipment, but you're only making $20,000 a year, you're not going to get any tax benefit from that. So he says, do you really need all of that equipment in the first year? Can you rent per job and bill that to your client? It's a very, very good question. I bought a 300 millimeter f2.8 6 years ago. I thought I was going to be a sports photographer, and I bought that, and I was really, really happy with it. And I'll tell you what, in the past 6 years, because I didn't end up becoming a sports photographer, I've probably used the lens about 30 times in 6 years. And it was the older version of the lens, so the resale value is very, very depressed at this point. Do I wish I had saved that $5,000 and just rented the few times I really, really needed it? Yes, absolutely. Now, a lot of people think, well, I'll just ring it up on my credit card. But the Tax Ninja says credit card debt is really, really stupid, because the interest rates can be as high as 20% per year. And so he suggests looking at a small business loan through the SBA, the Small Business Association, as a better idea. We've also heard that some students can roll in their equipment costs into their student loans, which typically has a much lower interest rate as well. But I actually thought his last point was probably the smartest one. He said it's much better to upgrade your skill to not have to use that new piece of gear. So do you need all of these zoom lenses, or can you get by with one prime? Do you need all of that lighting equipment, or can you get by with one light and a reflector? Increase your skill to reduce your expenses. It's going to have a dramatic effect on your finances in the future. So do you really need all that gear? And the answer should be no. Resist the temptation. You're a photographer. You're not a collector of photography equipment. Now, a lot of us want to create businesses in order that we can write off our expenses. And so here are some red flags that the Tax Ninja had for LLCs and corporations. In the eyes of the IRS, a legitimate expense is one that's ordinary and necessary to the generation of income. So, for example, that's why you can't write off your grocery bill, because that's not involved with your generation of income as a photographer, unless maybe you're a food photographer, right? So you're going to need to document everything with a paper receipt. In a lot of cases, you know, when I go out with PhotoShelter with clients, and we go out to lunch or dinner, that is a write-off for the business, because I'm meeting for business purposes. But then I have to annotate on the back who I was meeting with and what we talked about, because you just don't want to be audited by the IRS. So some red flags: large expenses that are out of place for the photographer. Home office happens to be one of those things. So let's say you have a 1,000 square foot apartment that you're paying $1,000 for. If you're making a $500 deduction per month on that, the IRS expects that 50% of your apartment is used specifically and only for your photographic services. And I'll tell you what, that's normally not even close to being the case. You probably have a little desk that occupies 40 square feet of your 1,000 square feet. So that's the stuff that you can write off. You can't say, well, sometimes I use my dining room table to meet with clients. That doesn't count, because it's not used strictly for your photographic business. Another great one is mileage expenses. Now, if you're traveling a lot, then it's a completely legit expense that you can write off. But you have to keep a journal of your traveling, and the IRS, if they come and audit you, a lot of times they want to see your odometer readings. What was your start and stop for this job? Where'd you go and what did you do? And the last one, to make things as simple as possible, and this is something that we heard a lot from the College Photographer of the Year winners, is that you really want to maintain a separate business account for your business expenses. It gets really difficult to intermingle your personal bank account with your business expenses for a lot of reasons. One of them being it's just easier to see what you're spending on your business. It's easier for you, and if you're ever unfortunately audited, it's easier for the IRS to see the legitimate business expenses flowing through your company. Setting your rates and booking your clients. If you don't know who John Harrington is and you haven't read his book, Best Business Practices for Photographers, I highly encourage you to do so. The guy has spent an entire lifetime compiling anecdotes from personal experience as well as just really smart thoughts about growing your business. And here are some that he shared with us in regards to billing and setting your rates. So first of all, time to complete your job is the least crucial component of your billing. And this is the reason why so many photographers hate the concept of day rate. It's very, very common for people to think about a day rate of, let's say, $500 or $1,000 or whatnot. The problem that John has with the day rate is if a law firm hires you to shoot portraits, corporate portraits of the lawyers, and you roll in at 9 o'clock and your day rate is $500, and you shoot all 12 partners and you're done at 11 a.m. If you've quoted them off of a day rate, that person, that, the lawyer's office manager is going to say, hey, we have you for the whole day. Why don't you stay and shoot some things? We have some meetings in the outside of the building and come to this deposition with us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you're really being paid for is the execution of the photo, not your time. So day rate, try to get rid of that concept. You're really shooting for a specific set of images, and that's how it should appear when you're quoting the customer, and that's how it should appear on the invoice. You also want to separate your shooting fee from your usage fee. This one is really, really hard. I totally get it because I've been in the same boat before. Someone says, hey, Alan, can you shoot my portrait so I can put it on my website? And I say, well, okay, the shoot will be $300, but if you want to use it on your website, that's going to be $100 a year based on your traffic, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard for people to grasp that for some reason with photography. But if you were Lady Gaga and you had a song and someone said, hey, I want to use that for the end credits in the X-Men movie, then all of a sudden it's really easy to understand, hey, a $300 million movie should be paying me a lot of money for using my music. For some reason, people get it with music, people will get it with video, but photography is very different. So in that regards, you really need to educate your client as to how they can understand what you're doing and why it costs so much. So I have two quotes from two pros, Tim Montawani, who's an incredible commercial photographer in San Diego, and Shannon Fagan, who used to run the Stock Artists Alliance. So Tim says, no one will ever pay you more the next time. As a young photographer, it's easy to get talked into shooting or selling a stock shot to someone who lures you in with the promise of what they will give you the next time. It rarely, if never, happens. If it seems like a bad deal, it is a bad deal. Walk away. We too often want to discount our rates because we're inexperienced. John Harrington says, if they've contacted you, they already think you can do the job. So there's no reason to discount your rate against another pro. There's no reason to do that. Shannon Fagan says, at times the fees associated with photography may seem particularly generous given the simplistic nature of a licensed transaction, right? Meaning I click a shutter, I give you the file. What's so difficult about that? What I have learned is my core net profit must be maintained at high enough level to mitigate the risks and high expenses associated with financial audits, worker compensation claims and audits, liability insurance coverages, and long-term investments for career shift retirement in an ever-increasingly expensive and inflation-prone society around me. Whew. What that means is running a business is expensive. So you can't just think about what does it cost me to press this trigger. If you're based on time, then 1/60th of a second probably isn't worth that much, right? When you think about something like how much, I read all of these forums online and they say we broke down the iPhone and we found that the components to build the iPhone only cost $60. So why does it cost $400 to buy an iPhone? Or similarly, you say that can of Red Bull in this bar, that's just sugar and water, which probably cost 5 cents, and the aluminum can was probably another penny. So why does it cost $5 for the Red Bull? Well, that's because Red Bull's got to send salespeople to all of these different bars with little Red Bull fridges, have massive advertising campaigns, right? Have the racing team, etc. Everything that's in support of marketing Red Bull as this amazing drink is what you're paying for. So running a business is expensive. So don't undersell yourself. That gets us into the next idea of what is your cost of doing business. Greg Smith, photographer and writer, helped to develop the National Press Photographer Association's Cost of Doing Business Calculator. And what this allows you to do is input different business expenses in various categories, your desired salary, and the number of days of work per year that you anticipate having. And based on that, it's going to generate your overhead costs for every day you work. Okay, so it's not telling you how much you should price. It's just saying when you get out of bed, this is actually your cost of doing business. This is what it looks like. It's very, very simple. It has these different categories. And, you know, I talked to Greg and I said, you know, some of these things might not seem so intuitive. Like for repairs, you have $900 down per year in equipment repairs. And he says, it's so easy to walk through a door and have a lens hit the frame of the door. And that's going to be $250 for the lens and $300 to fix the camera. And if you have to send it in, then you have a rental for a week that might cost you $500 to $1,000 for the week. So all of these things start to add up very, very quickly. And this is how you get to this. If you want to generate $40,000 in annual salary with all of these expenses, that's how you get $90,000 a year of billing that's required. Now, the other tricky thing is it asks you how many total days that you expect to bill. Okay? Now, you might think there's 352 days in the year. Yeah, probably work 300 days a year, right? And Greg says, you know what, in the 25, 30 years that I've been shooting, I've never billed more than 100 days in a year. So think about that, 52 weeks in a year, 100 days of billing, he's working on average 2 days a week. Does that seem like a lot or a little? To me, it seems like if you're hustling from gig to gig, that might seem about right. And in talking to some of these CPOY winners, they said, you know, I go for weeks sometimes without any work. So be conservative in your estimates of expenses. A couple quotes from Greg. My goal is not to help someone succeed, but to help them understand what failure is and how perhaps to avoid it. And the calculator isn't a way to price, but it's information you need in order to price. So if you know your cost of doing business is $900 a day and you want to shoot weddings on the weekend, then you better make sure you're charging about $2 grand, $3 grand to go do that, because that's really what it's costing you in a lot of ways. Freelancing is hard. The calculator points out that it is hard. Should you climb El Capitan thinking you can do it with no ropes and slick shoes? You can't. You got to get ready. Understanding your costs and possible return is part of that. Insurance, health, liability, equipment insurance. So business equipment and health insurance are fundamental to running a professional business. So Greg is with the NPPA, so he had this quote to say, photojournalism is a dangerous business. And we've seen in the past 60 days, obviously in Libya, 3 photojournalists who've been killed in the line of duty. But you don't have to go out of the country to understand that when you're walking around all day, you can slip, you can have your back be thrown out because you have so much gear in your backpack. There's so many things that can go wrong, and you really are endangering your future by not insuring yourself. In terms of business insurance or liability insurance, many venues, like if you're going to shoot a wedding at a hall, many of those venues require what's known as a certificate of insurance for liability reasons. They don't want you setting up a lighting stand that falls on a customer, right, injures the customer and breaks a table. Even with the limited liability of an LLC or corporation, you could still be sued for your equipment because that's part of the business stuff. So insurance can provide protection against lawsuit and reimbursement for your equipment. The last of the expert advices before we get into the CPOY winners, we talked to Frank Meo, who owns Meo Represents, an agency whose roster includes Pet Bonet, Tim Mantovani, Deanne Fitzmaurice, and more. Now, a lot of kids coming out of school say, oh, I'd love to get an agent. That's really going to help grow my business. And what Frank said to us was, an agent will take on photographers who know they can help generate revenue. So in a lot of cases, agents aren't going to look at kids right out of school because they have no clients that they can bring on board. The agents want you to have clients that you can bring to the table. Now, what does the agent actually do? Is he going to provide a regular flow of business? And the answer is no. Things are not like they were in the 80s and the 90s. There's no such thing as a regular flow of business. So you have to be realistic when you sign up with an agent, if you're fortunate enough to do so, to understand the dynamics of what they will do. They will go to breakfasts. They will participate on phone calls. They will pitch their roster of photographers. But that doesn't mean that you individually have to stop marketing yourself. And a guy like Tim Mantovani still has his personal projects, book projects. He's got a website. He does promos, etc., in addition to being represented by Frank Meo. Frank suggests younger photographers assist a lot, irrespective of the type of photography you do, because you're going to learn by watching people that have gone through it before. And of course, his best piece of advice, marry an art buyer. Your percentages go way up when this happens. So a bit of humor, but unfortunately a bit of true humor there. All right, let's talk about some of these CPOY winners. Casey Templeton won in 2005. Here's an image from his portfolio. You know, the CPOY winners tend to be very photojournalistic in nature, and his portfolio was very, very documentary in nature. Ironically, Casey never took a photojournalism course. They didn't offer it at his school. This is just what he did. This is the type of stuff that he shoots today. Highly commercial, highly stylized. And this was a promo that he did last year. He created a really, really cool promo that he mailed out to several hundred art buyers around the world because this was his big marketing thing. And it got such good reviews. He did a whole blog post on his website, caseytempleton.com, that included videos about how he assembled it. And it really helped accelerate the growth of his commercial business. Here's some details on that. So Casey had no affinity to photojournalism and started a commercial and advertising business almost immediately after graduating. And one of the reasons why this happened was a buyer from Walmart ended up calling him for a job. So I don't know whether that was his plan to be the advertising commercial guy, but it sure was a good path for him. So here's his quote: "I realized my commercial work came mostly through word of mouth and that I had made no marketing efforts. I knew in order to take my business to the next level, I needed to start marketing myself on a national level." For him, the commercial advertising focus accounted for 85% of his revenue last year. So pretty incredible there. Here's some details about how he structured his business. So Casey set up an S corporation, that's a type of business entity, under the advisement of his accountant with whom he's worked for 5 years. So almost after, a year after winning that award, he started working with an accountant to understand how he could grow his business. On a yearly basis, he uses his balance sheets to write up a business plan with income goals for the next year. Now, this might sound foreign to you. What's a balance sheet? Do I really need a business plan? Do I need to set goals for myself? Well, Casey is I don't know in age whether he's the oldest, but in terms of being in business the longest, he is the oldest in that regards. And the way that he structured his business and the way that he thinks about planning is the most mature out of the set of photographers. So to get to this point where he's a successful commercial photographer, this is what he needs to do. He also consulted with other local photographers to determine his pricing to ensure he wasn't lowballing people in the community and creating unsustainable downward pricing pressure. So think about this. He wasn't a guy who moved to an area and said, the way that I'm going to generate business is by undercutting everyone. The way that he did it was by providing a superior product and service and being compensated as such. That promo that we looked at that he blogged about, so he spent about $15,000 on the box promo, a new portfolio, a new website, and marketing consulting to help him do that. But he says, take a few years to get a solid body of work together. Don't do it right out of the gate. So he's not recommending this huge expenditure to a student who's just graduated. You only get one first impression, so make it count. Matt Eich, CPOY 2006, documentary photographer. Matt co-founded Luceo Images, which is one of the more successful photographer cooperatives that has been created in the past few years. It provides creative and business support for its 6 members. Now, this interesting thing about Matt, you know, I said Casey is the oldest or most senior of the CPOY winners, and he's got his act together. This is how Matt got his act together. He had a child when he was 21. His girlfriend at the time, who's now his wife, I think was 20 or 19 at the time. And he says, I was fortunate to have that kick in the pants to get me moving. That experience has been very formative, as you can imagine. And it really brought to him very quickly the importance of understanding his business and how he was going to generate enough money to support his family at a very, very young age. So he actually started freelancing and being paid for freelancing in school. There were no, unpaid internships for this guy. And he says, you need to chart a sustainable growth for your business because it shouldn't be stagnating and doing the same thing year after year. Some information about Luceo. So Luceo, this photographer collective with 6 members, is a Colorado-based LLC. The members pay monthly dues plus a percentage of all their photo income. So if they're working other jobs, they're paying a percentage, a small percentage of that back into Luceo. Each member has administrative duties. So they have like a student scholarship or award. They have an exhibition series that they do. So all of the members aren't there just to say, I'm a part of Luceo. They're actually trying to make Luceo into a growing, thriving entity for their photography. And Luceo was initially conceived as a support system for its younger members, but quickly evolved into an organized business entity because they found that they could leverage themselves together and they could do work, good work together. Travis Dove, CPOY 2007, did a whole series of portraits on Skatopia that was featured in the Rolling Stone magazine, and it was what won him World Press honors. Travis earned his master's degree from Ohio University, and he says the CPOY and World Press Awards created a valuable network that helped grow his business. And when we were talking about pricing, etc., this is what he had to say. The idea of turning down a low-paying gig and using that time to research for a higher-paying job, it's a very intimidating idea for a young photographer. And he wasn't speaking about you, he was speaking about himself. He still has problems today saying, oh, you have a $300 editorial job? Why don't I do that? Why don't I spend the whole day for $300 instead of thinking about how I can market myself more effectively and how I can get a better paying job? And then he says, I can just see myself spending a lot more cautiously. He was talking about equipment from the outset and having a better business mind from the beginning. That would have been really, really advantageous. So Travis, kind of similar to Matt, is married to his wife who is currently in dental school. So he's basically supporting the two of them on his income from photography. And that has really honed the way that he thinks about his expenses, thinks about the way that he generates revenue, and that has been very formative to him as well. He set up an S-Corp under the advisement of his accountant, who was a family accountant. He separated his business income and expenses and creates monthly budgets. So when I was talking to him, he was one of the guys that said, you know, it's so basic, but it took me a few years to actually separate my business account from my personal account. He said, money used to just come in into my personal account and then I'd spend it. And then I would have a dry month and I'd be like panicking. So when he got paid, he was flush. When he didn't get paid, he was broke. And that's a really, really terrible way, you know, when you have that uncertainty, particularly when you have a family, to be living your life. So he's much more frugal with expenses now than he was before all of this planning occurred. So just another reason to think about the future a little bit more and sit down with an accountant or sit down with your dad or mom or uncle or someone who knows about this stuff to help you set up a budget and some milestones. So the first three guys, Casey, Matt, and Travis, a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, have these financial plans, have these business entities, have met with an accountant. And then I talked to Tim Hussin, who won in 2008. Tim, very interesting guy. Now, the one thing I'll say about all these CPOY winners, another reason why they were so compelling is because the skill component was taken out of the equation when we're talking about business success. We know by the fact that they've won these awards that they're all phenomenal photographers. So what contributes to business success after that was the question that we were asking. So Tim Hussin, he is working currently on a personal project entitled America Recycled. So him and his brother, who's a Fulbright scholar, decided to jump on their bicycles and bicycle from community to community, looking at these fringe communities and documenting them and getting to know them. So that was funded by a combination of Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding website, and the National Geographic Young Explorers Grant. He is not working outside of his personal project. He does not take assignments from anyone for anything. So he says, I'm living a transient lifestyle right now. I'm not getting consistent work. I'm not trying as hard as a lot of people since I'm dedicating most of my time to my personal project. A lot of young photographers feel like they want to go to these exotic places, but for me, I realized that I wanted to explore my own background and heritage, so that's why he's going around the US on his bicycle. So what exactly do I mean, and what does he mean when he says he's living a transient lifestyle right now? He has no legal entity for his business, so he's just a sole proprietor, and all of this business stuff is sort of not top of mind for him. He's unconcerned with money and doesn't mind being poor. He's living a transient lifestyle, dumpster diving for food, and enjoying interacting with the communities he's meeting. So we talked a little bit about the dumpster diving, and his take on it was this. He says, every day supermarkets throw out a ton of good food. And he says we save a lot of money by dumpster diving, and the money that we save is that many fewer hours that we need to be working to pay for that stuff. So talking to Tim was such an incredible contrast to talking to the other guys, because here's a guy, I wouldn't say that he doesn't care, but he cares much more about his art than he does about thinking about the future or thinking about his business. So in some ways it was very, very refreshing, and in other ways it was terrifying. Right? Because he says, I acknowledge that dumpster diving is not for everyone, but he doesn't mind, so it was okay for him. Ryan Henriksen, College Photographer of the Year, 2009. Again, skill does not come into play here. He's obviously a very, very skilled photographer. Ryan Henriksen is a staff photographer at the Columbia Daily Tribune in Missouri. And he says, that's part of the reason I really wanted to get a staff job, because I didn't know how to have my own business. Sometimes I feel like I just took the easy way out by just not learning it. And then he goes on to say, I'm really bad at business. I really just meet people and stay in contact with them. And through those connections and friendships, I hear about internships and jobs. So I want to address two parts of this thing. First of all, I completely understand where he's coming from. There's nothing wrong with getting a staff, full-time paid job where you get medical benefits, you're guaranteed work, and you know that there's going to be assignments for you to do every day, and you can build your book that way. I don't think there's anything shameful about that at all, because freelancing is very, very difficult, and that's a lifestyle choice that people are going to pursue. But the staff positions, as you know, if you've been following the newspaper industry, aren't going to be around, or aren't going to be guaranteed to be around forever. And I think that everybody in photography today really needs to start thinking about what's going to be next in photography for them, and whether photography is going to be a part of that. And part of that is really understanding from a business perspective, if you had to do it on your own, how would you do it? Now, we talked to Robert Seal, who's a very accomplished sports and portrait and corporate photographer, and when he transitioned from the sporting news, he said, I didn't make the transition until I had built up enough of a book with my freelance clients that I felt that I could comfortably shift over with no impact to my income. So that's a really, really smart and seasoned professional way to do it. Robert's really, really anal. He thinks about this stuff all the time. And I would say, like, if you have a staff position and you want to go freelance, and start building your book right now of clients and do exactly what Robert did. But be thinking about it, because you never know when that staff position is going to be eliminated. Now, the second part of this, I'm really bad at business. I really just meet people and stay in contact with them. This isn't really so much about business as it is about marketing. So he said to me, I don't have business cards. I just go up to people and I try to be their friend. There's definitely something to be said about being genuine. But there's also something to be said about the fact that there's 100 photographers out there that could take your place. And if you don't have a business card, and if you're not being slightly more aggressive about having touch points with your potential clients, you're destroying your own business. You're not taking advantage of your own business. So get business cards, collect business cards, email these people current work that you're doing, get them to sign up for your Facebook fan page or your blog RSS feed, and find out a way that on a monthly or a quarterly basis you can touch base with them and say, hey, here's a new project. Do you have anything in mind that I could be working on for you? It's okay to market yourself as a photographer. You don't have to base your entire professional relationship, your professional career, on friendship and relationships that you've created. Now, networking is incredibly important. And so I'm not saying that you don't need to build a network. What I'm saying is take advantage of the network that you're building and don't rely on being the nice guy to drive success. So Ryan has a staff position at a newspaper. He says to me he's intending to learn more about business and is not counting on the staff position being there indefinitely, and he wishes he had more exposure to business while he was in school. And finally, we have Rachel Mummey, who just won last year, College Photographer of the Year 2010. Beautiful images. The image on the right of the old man and the old woman won, I believe, a World Press Award. That's a couple both who suffer from Alzheimer's. So really, really deep documentary work, beautiful documentary work that she's working on. Rachel Mummey is an intern at the Jasper Herald in Indiana. And again, like I was surprised talking to her as well. She said, I view newspaper work as the goal. I want to be a photojournalist so that I can take pictures that people in my community can see, but our industry is changing and I don't know if that kind of role will always be there. So take a guy like Casey who says, I want to go out and be a fantastic commercial photographer and make money and shoot for all these brands. And then Rachel says, when I was growing up, I thought being that newspaper photographer was the coolest thing in the world. And not for the New York Times. I'm just talking about the newspaper in my local hometown and covering the people in my community. So that's really kind of cool. She says, I don't have a lot of expenses. I don't have an extensive budget plan. I'm sure as I get older, I'll have to face that when it comes. So she is at a paid internship, but she's really trying to control her expenses, and she's not thinking so much about future business planning. And I think what we're trying to convey to you today is that you should do that as soon as possible. All of her equipment is bought on school loans, and she says, I'm still paying for it all. I don't have a budget. I basically buy gear when I can afford it. Now, if we go back to what the tax ninja said, this is actually a really, really bad strategy. That, hey, I've got $500 now I can buy that new lens that I wanted, rather than thinking, what's the best time from a tax perspective to buy this equipment? Maybe it's next year. Maybe it's not this year. Maybe I should rent or borrow a lens from a friend who's not using it. So I think you can begin to see when we're talking to all of these people, you can start to play armchair quarterback and say, this person should do this and that person should do that, and that should help you understand what you should be doing for your own business. So here are the conclusions that we got from these 6 College Photographer of the Year winners. The older graduates have a much greater sense of their business and how to grow it because they're living it. If they're going to be a photographer for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, you have to become an adult at some point and think about these adult things like business planning. And I don't mean that in a pejorative perspective whatsoever. I mean that it's difficult and it takes time and effort to not only think about photography, but think about your business and your career. Everyone unilaterally valued the art of photography. And some photographers like Tim are guiding their careers through a very creative mindset, saying, I don't care about money right now. I really just want to do the best job I can with this project. But others expressed the desire to have had more exposure to business practices while they were in school or even afterwards. You know, a couple of them waited a couple years before they went to go talk to their accountant. And sometimes it was like a family accountant. Well, if your parents are using an accountant, that's a great time to say, can I have 15 minutes of your time to talk about my photography business? Some felt trepidation about charging what they're worth or turning down low-paying jobs like Travis. It's an endemic problem for even the top photographers in the industry to want to lowball yourself. So really resist that temptation. I think one of the good things about the Luceo situation is that they can be a support group not only for their creative endeavors, but also for their business endeavors. One of the founders is also a lawyer. He's the guy who incorporated them in Colorado as an LLC. So there's some legal acumen that exists in there, and because they all have their own clients, there's also a business acumen that they're learning. I think it's really important to try to share that information with your peers and learn from people who may be a few years out from you about what has worked and what hasn't worked. So what should you do as someone who's considering building a business in photography? First of all, you got to use that NPPA cost of doing business calculator. You can get it if you just Google for cost of doing business. That calculator comes up in the first position. And you really want to get a realistic sense of how difficult it is to start your own business. Even if you're only targeting $30,000 a year, which really isn't that much if you're in a city, right? You're going to have to be generating $70,000, $80,000 a year in revenue. It's not easy. We encourage you to meet with an accountant to create a financial plan with some career milestones for yourself. It's really tough. I mean, maybe you can do it for the first year. I know obviously a lot of kids who come out of school don't have a, quote, plan for their career. But I think the sooner that you can get on that track, the better it's going to benefit you when you're 35 and wondering why you don't have any savings. Control your expenses. Don't buy all of that gear. You don't need it. Rent it. Bill the client for it. Learn how to say there are expenses associated with this shoot. That's why there's a $200 rental charge, even though it only cost you $100, because you had to go pick it up. You had to return it, etc. You know? And finally, create a marketing plan for yourself, and don't be shy about promoting yourself. You need a marketing plan because just taking photos is not enough. People aren't going to find you. People aren't going to find your website unless you have an active way for people to get that URL or find you on Facebook or find your work on Vimeo or find you through contests. Entering a contest is a marketing vehicle. It can be part of your marketing plan. You can get more info. We have a bunch of free reports at photoshelter.com/mkt/research. This particular information will be consolidated into a new report that we will launch next week along with those videos. We hope that you download those. And then finally, hope you can connect with us. Blog.photoshelter.com has a whole lot of business information. We just launched a new Facebook page, and we also have a downloadable guide on how to create your Facebook page for photographers. Follow us on Twitter at PhotoShelter, and then we have a Vimeo channel that has a lot of these webinars and tutorials on how to use PhotoShelter as well at vimeo.com/PhotoShelter. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you picked up some good tidbits of information, and look for a video recording of this next week.
Alan, thank you so much for that. That was such great information. One thing I can pass on to everybody as someone who owns a studio, as soon as you started to get yourself a little bit settled and you've got a body of work, the first thing you need to do is find an accountant you can work with. that can make or break. And the other part of it is that you definitely need to market. I've dealt with many photographers over the years and found out that the ones that ultimately are successful are the ones who are willing to promote. Because a lot of times it is getting your name out there. They're not going to beat a path to your door. You're going to have to let them know that you're there. So before we close up, I'd like to invite Bill Grattan back again to just any closing words from you, Bill?
No, I mean,
no.
Can you hear me?
Bill must. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I just would basically, reiterate what's already been said, and as I've always said, that the
speak up a bit, Bill. I can barely hear you.
As I've always said at the presentations that I make, you can be the world's greatest photographer, but if you don't know how to balance a checkbook, run a business, or how to market yourself, you're not going to be around for very long. Likewise, you can be the world's worst photographer, and if you know how to run a business and how to market yourself, you have a very promising career ahead of you. So this is a very important part of being a photographer, unfortunately. It's not just being able to take a good picture. If you're going to be successful, you have to be able to run a business.
So true. What again, just to kind of just take what Bill said and add to it, I've seen many photographers who produce so-so work who are extremely successful because many clients are buying the photographer rather than the work. They know that the person's going to be there and is going to do the job, and they're buying the person. So you really got to get out there and you got to sell and you got to present. You got to separate yourself out from the crowd. So until we see you guys all online again soon, on behalf of everyone else, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Everybody have a great weekend. And until next time, bye-bye.